The wedding was perfect. Golden chandeliers, crystal glasses, and laughter that dripped with wealth. But then, the doors opened. Silence fell. A woman stepped inside, her heels tapping against the marble floor, slow and deliberate. Eyes widened. Hands tightened around champagne flutes. It had been 11 years, but they knew exactly who she was. Ivy Quinn. Once discarded, now unrecognizable. Stronger. Sharper. Uninvited. Yet here she stood, staring straight into the eyes of the family that had erased her. Eleanor Quinn's smirk twitched. What is she doing here? Scarlett, draped in white lace, folded her arms. You're not on the guest list. And then Nathan Callahan, the groom, saw her. His face paled. His breath hitched. Wait. She's. The past had returned. And it wasn't leaving quietly. Stay. Watch. This is only the beginning. The Callahan estate was the epitome of extravagance. Gold chandeliers casting a warm, honeyed glow over pristine white tablecloths. Champagne flutes clinking in delicate harmony, and the hum of carefully curated conversations weaving through the air. The elite of high society moved through the grand ballroom like figures in a well-rehearsed play, their laughter light, their smiles practiced. It was a night of celebration. The wedding of Scarlett Quinn and Nathan Callahan was nothing short of perfection. Then the doors opened. The sound was subtle, a mere creak against the distant melody of a string quartet, but somehow, it sliced through the room like a razor. And then came the footsteps. Click. 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 Slow. Unhurried. Deliberate. A woman stepped inside, her presence sucking the air out of the room. The temperature seemed to drop as heads turned, eyes widening in recognition, in shock, in something dangerously close to fear. Ivy Quinn had returned. Gone was the broken girl they had discarded 11 years ago. The girl who had been humiliated, abandoned, erased from their world as if she had never existed. This Ivy was different. She walked with an effortless grace, clad in a black silk gown that clung to her like liquid shadow, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo, revealing the sharp angles of her jawline. The dim lighting caught the cold glint of the diamond bracelet wrapped around her wrist, but no jewel could outshine the quiet power radiating from her. She didn't belong here. And yet, she belonged more than any of them. At the front of the room, beneath an archway of ivory roses, Scarlett Quinn turned, the satin train of her wedding gown pooling around her feet. The gasp that had nearly slipped past her lips was quickly swallowed, replaced by a slow, curling smirk. You're not on the guest list. Her voice was saccharine sweet, yet laced with venom, designed to wound. She stood tall, shoulders back, the picture of a perfect bride, flawless, adored, untouchable. But the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, the way her manicured nails pressed, just a little too hard against her own wrist, betrayed something else. Tension. Unease. Across the room, Eleanor Quinn took a measured sip of her champagne, her gaze flicking up and down Ivy with lazy disinterest. Then, with a quiet scoff, she turned to the nearest guest and murmured, "What is she doing here?" The words were casual, almost bored, but Ivy caught the way her fingers tightened around the delicate stem of her glass. A single crack, and it would shatter. Ivy said nothing. Not yet. She turned her attention to the man who had once been her father. Dominic Quinn sat at one of the ornate, gold-trimmed tables, posture relaxed, gaze unfocused as if he hadn't noticed her at all. But his fingers betrayed him. They gripped the whiskey glass so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. His silence was calculated. A refusal to acknowledge her existence. Coward. And then there was Nathan Callahan. The man who stood beside Scarlett, her groom. The man who had everything, power, wealth, a future so carefully carved out for him. His jaw was set, his body tense, as if ready to call security. But when his gaze met Ivy's, something shifted. The color drained from his face, his lips parting slightly, his entire demeanor unraveling in real time. Shock. Recognition. Guilt. Wait, his voice cracked, barely above a whisper. She's. But the words never fully formed. The past had returned. And it was here to stay. The weight of Ivy's presence settled over the ballroom like a storm rolling in, silent, inevitable, and utterly inescapable. Scarlet Quinn, still standing beneath the ivory floral arch, let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, though it rang just a little too loud, just a little too force. You? Successful, she scoffed, tilting her chin in mock amusement. Don't be ridiculous. What, did you crawl out of whatever gutter you've been hiding in to beg for money? Ivy didn't react. She had expected this. The same venom, the same arrogance, Scarlet hadn't changed at all. No, Ivy said, her voice steady as stone. I came back to correct a few lies. With deliberate precision, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a crisp, bound folder. Then, without ceremony, she tossed it onto the grand banquet table. The papers slid across the pristine white linen, stopping right in front of Nathan Callahan. A single sheet fluttered loose. Nathan hesitated, glancing from the papers to Ivy, then back again, before finally picking one up. His brow furrowed as he scanned the contents, the muscles in his jaw clenching tighter with every word. The silence in the room thickened. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to his fiancée. Scarlet, his voice was measured, quiet, but there was something dangerous beneath it. What is this? Scarlet barely glanced at the papers before rolling her eyes. Oh, please, she waved a dismissive hand, but Ivy caught the slight tremor in her fingers. This is just some nonsense she probably forged. Nathan, are you seriously going to stand here and let this? It's from the university's official records. Ivy cut in smoothly, watching Scarlet like a predator watching its prey. Your beloved bride never graduated from medical school. In fact, she was expelled years ago. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Nathan's grip on the documents tightened. His shoulders stiffened, his lips pressing into a thin, unreadable line. Tell me she's lying. His voice was no longer calm. It was a demand. Scarlet's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time that night, she looked rattled. I don't have to explain myself to her, she snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. She's always been jealous of me. She's trying to ruin my wedding. Ivy let out a small, humorless laugh. Oh, Scarlet, she mused, tilting her head, you really should be more careful with your words. You have so much more to lose. Scarlet's lips pressed together, her breath coming out in short, controlled bursts. And then Ivy reached into her clutch again. This time, the folder she pulled out was thicker, heavier. When it landed on the table, the soft thud reverberated through the room. Eleanor Quinn's grip on her champagne glass tightened. Dominic Quinn shifted in his chair, his knuckles whitening around his whiskey glass. Scarlet, for the first time, took a step back. What? What is that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ivy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took her time, flipping open the folder with deliberate care. One by one, she laid the sheets across the table. Bank statements. Offshore accounts. Falsified tax reports. Financial records that painted an ugly picture of greed, corruption, and deception. This, Ivy said finally, her voice cool and cutting, is proof that your entire family is built on fraud. Scarlet inhaled sharply, her mask of confidence cracking at the edges. The murmurs in the room grew louder, shifting from hushed confusion to something sharper. Something accusatory. Eleanor let out a breathless laugh, her expression carefully neutral, though Ivy caught the way her fingers trembled around the stem of her glass. This is absurd, Eleanor scoffed. Nathan, darling, you know better than to entertain this nonsense. Oh, I'm just getting started, Ivy interrupted. And then, with ruthless precision, she turned to Dominic Quinn. The man who had once called himself her father. The man who had left her to rot. Tell me, Dominic, she said, her voice soft but razor sharp, how does it feel to watch your empire crumble? Dominic didn't respond. Didn't even look at her. But his grip on his glass tightened so hard that, with a sharp crack, the delicate crystal shattered in his hands. A suffocating silence settled over the ballroom. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of Ivy's last words had flattened the room into absolute stillness. Then, you're lying. Eleanor Quinn's voice sliced through the tension, high-pitched, nearly hysterical. The poised, untouchable woman, the wife of Dominic Quinn, the matriarch of their pristine family, was unraveling before their eyes. You little brat, she spat, stepping forward, her hands clenched into fists. You think you can just walk in here and rewrite history? Ivy didn't move. Didn't blink. Rewrite, she echoed, her voice calm. No, Eleanor. I'm just bringing the truth to light. She turned her gaze to the stunned crowd, letting them absorb every carefully placed word. This woman, Ivy continued, gesturing toward Eleanor with a slow wave of her hand, is not my mother. She never was. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some guests exchanged bewildered glances. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, drinks forgotten in their hands. From the corner of her eye, Ivy saw Nathan Callahan shift uncomfortably. His once steady grip on Scarlett's waist had loosened, his gaze dark with something unreadable. He turned, locking eyes with Scarlett. What is she talking about? His voice was quieter now, but laced with suspicion. Scarlett stiffened. Nothing, she said too quickly. She's trying to stir up drama, that's all. She's always done this, Nathan. She. Scarlett. His voice hardened. Is she telling the truth? Scarlett's nails dug into his arm. I told you, she's lying. Ivy let out a slow, humorless chuckle. Oh, Scarlett, she murmured, tilting her head, if I were lying, you wouldn't look like you just saw a ghost. Scarlett's mouth snapped shut, her breathing uneven. Nathan took a step back from her. So it is true, he said, realization dawning on his face. You knew. Nathan, please. Scarlett reached for him, but he shook her off. Ivy continued, her voice unwavering. Eleanor wasn't just my father's wife. She was his mistress. A collective inhale. Shocked, scandalized, eager for more. My real mother, Ivy continued, her gaze locking onto Dominic Quinn now, was the woman you threw away like garbage. Dominic's face darkened. Eleanor took a step forward, her expression livid. You shut your damn mouth, she seethed. Ivy smirked. Why? Because you're afraid they'll finally see you for what you are. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a whisper. The other woman. The homewrecker. The liar. Eleanor's hand twitched as if she was seconds away from slapping her. Scarlett, who had been standing rigid with barely contained rage, suddenly snapped. That's enough, she shouted, her voice breaking. All eyes turned to her. Her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists at her sides, trying to regain control. She's lying. Scarlett insisted, though her voice wavered. She's just jealous. She's always been jealous. Ever since we were kids, she hated that I was better, that I was better. Ivy interrupted, her tone mocking. That's funny. Because I don't remember being the one who had to lie about everything to keep my perfect little world from falling apart. Scarlett's face burned red. Ivy turned away from her, scanning the room, taking in the mix of shock, curiosity, and anticipation. Then, her eyes landed on someone standing just beyond the crowd. Isabel Callahan. Nathan's younger sister. The second their gazes met, Isabel went rigid. Ivy's smirk widened. "Oh," she murmured, taking a slow step toward her. "You thought I forgot about you, didn't you?" Scarlett inhaled sharply. Isabel's hands gripped the fabric of her dress. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, shaking her head. "I have nothing to do with this." Ivy clicked her tongue, shaking her head in mock disappointment. "Lying really does run in your little circle, doesn't it?" she mused. Isabel's face paled. Nathan turned toward his sister now, confusion crossing his face. "Isabel," he said slowly. "What is she talking about?" Isabel swallowed hard. "Nathan, she started, but the words caught in her throat. Scarlett whirled on her, eyes blazing. "Shut up," she hissed under her breath, but the panic in her voice was unmistakable. Ivy folded her arms, watching with amusement. "Go on, Isabel," she said smoothly. Tell him how you helped Scarlett destroy me. Tell him how you lied to protect her." Nathan turned back to Scarlett, his expression unreadable. "What is she talking about?" Scarlett didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to Isabel, her voice sharp and desperate. "Don't say a word," she ordered. "She's just trying to turn us against each other." "Scarlett, stop." Nathan snapped. Scarlett flinched. For the first time all night, she looked genuinely afraid. Nathan exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face as if trying to make sense of the situation. "So it's true," he muttered. "Everything she said, it's all true." Scarlett reached for him again, her voice breaking. "Nathan, please, you have to believe me." But he had already taken a step away from her. Ivy watched it all unfold, watched Scarlett's carefully constructed world crumble piece by piece. But she wasn't done yet. Not even close. The tension in the ballroom was suffocating. The grand chandeliers, the golden accents, the perfectly arranged floral centerpieces, everything that once exuded wealth and power now felt like a fragile illusion, seconds away from shattering. Ivy stood at the center of it all, calm, unshaken. She could feel the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her, but she welcomed it. After all, she hadn't come here to be ignored. She had come here to end them. With measured precision, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, black USB drive. The tiny device gleamed under the ballroom lights, insignificant in size, but devastating in its contents. She held it up between two fingers, her lips curving into a slow, knowing smirk. "And now," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "let's finish this." Scarlett's breath hitched. Eleanor took a half step forward, her expression strained. "What is that?" Dominic finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Ivy turned her gaze to him, tilting her head slightly. "You already know," she replied smoothly. She tossed the USB onto the table, right in front of Nathan. "Why don't you do the honors?" Nathan hesitated only for a moment before snatching the device up. Without a word, he strode toward the sleek laptop that had been set up for the wedding slideshow. A live feed of their engagement photos had been playing on the screen just moments ago, a carefully curated fairy tale for their guests to admire. Now, it would be replaced with something much uglier. Nathan plugged in the USB, his movements tense, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. The screen flickered. Then, Lines of text filled the monitor. Documents. Bank statements. Legal files. Evidence meticulously gathered and categorized. The Quinn family's empire, laid bare for everyone to see. The guests gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others simply stood frozen, their wide eyes scanning the damning information spilling across the screen. What? What is this? Someone whispered. Fake, Eleanor spat, her voice shaking. This is all fabricated. Ivy let out a soft chuckle. Really, she mused. Because these are directly pulled from your financial records. Offshore accounts. Falsified tax reports. Embezzlement schemes. I could go on, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. Nathan's face was unreadable as he scrolled through the files, but his knuckles were white from how hard he was gripping the laptop. Then, suddenly, he stopped. A single file had caught his attention. His eyes darkened as he clicked on it, and a new set of documents appeared on the screen. Scarlett leaned forward slightly, then recoiled as if she'd been slapped. It was her name. A medical record. A forged diploma. The hospital she had claimed to be working at. The reality of the situation crashed over the crowd like a tidal wave. Scarlett had never been a doctor. She had never even come close. Nathan exhaled sharply, his entire body tense with restrained fury. Then, without hesitation, he reached up, yanked the wedding ring off his finger, and threw it onto the marble floor. The sharp clink echoed through the stunned silence. Scarlett flinched. It's over, Nathan said coldly. We're done. Scarlett's breath came in short, shallow bursts. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. Nathan, please. I said we're done. His tone left no room for argument. Tears welled in Scarlett's eyes, but for the first time that night, she had no words. No manipulation. No escape. But Ivy wasn't done. Not yet. She turned back to Dominic and Eleanor, her expression colder than ever. Of course, the money laundering, tax fraud, and identity theft are bad enough, she said lightly, but what really interests me is how you've been using my name. Eleanor stiffened. Dominic's jaw tightened. You stole from me, Ivy continued, her voice dropping into something lethal. For 11 years, you used my name to cover up your illegal activities. You buried me so you could use my identity for your own gain. Well, guess what? She stepped forward. I'm alive. A sharp gasp echoed from the back of the room. Dr. Matthew Langford, the director of the hospital Scarlett had claimed to be working at, surged forward. His face was a mix of fury and disbelief. Dominic, he hissed, you told me she was a licensed doctor. You vouched for her credentials. Dominic said nothing. Matthew turned to Scarlett, his voice rising. You lied to me. Scarlett shrank back, shaking her head. No, I didn't. But it was useless. Because at that moment, the doors to the ballroom burst open. Several uniformed officers strode inside, their presence sending a ripple of shock through the room. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, his badge glinting under the chandelier light. Dominic Quinn. Eleanor Quinn. Scarlett Quinn, he announced, his voice firm. You are under investigation for financial fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft. You are to come with us immediately. Eleanor stumbled back, her face drained of color. No, you can't do this, she shrieked. This is a mistake. One of the officers reached for Dominic's wrist, but he jerked away. Get your hands off me, he barked, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He was no longer the powerful patriarch of the Quinn family. He was just a desperate man, backed into a corner. Scarlett let out a strangled sob. "Nathan, please, help me," she begged, reaching for him. Nathan didn't move. Didn't speak. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, he turned away. Scarlett's face crumpled. Ivy stood motionless, watching as the people who had once destroyed her life were now watching theirs burn. Eleanor was dragged toward the exit, still screaming about how it wasn't fair. Dominic walked in silence, his head held high, but Ivy could see the way his hands trembled at his sides. Scarlett, however, collapsed onto the floor. For the first time in her life, she had lost. Ivy let out a slow exhale, feeling the weight of 11 years of pain finally begin to lift. Then, without looking back, she turned and walked away. The grand ballroom, once a dazzling display of power and luxury, was now nothing more than a battlefield of broken illusions. Gone was the polished elegance, the carefully curated perfection. In its place, the shattered remains of a family that had built their empire on lies. The murmurs of the guests had turned into hushed whispers, some too afraid to move, others too eager to witness the final collapse. Eleanor Quinn, ever the picture of control, had lost all composure. "This isn't happening," she shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. She turned frantically, searching the faces in the crowd, hoping, praying, that someone would step forward, that someone would save her. No one did. The people who had once flocked to her parties, who had praised her as an icon of high society, now refused to meet her gaze. They had seen the truth. And there was no unseeing it. "Please," Eleanor begged, her voice cracking. "You all know me. You know us. We've been part of this world for years. This is all a mistake." Silence. Her hands shook violently as the officers tightened their grip on her arms. "You ungrateful cowards," she suddenly snapped, her face twisting with rage. "After everything we've done for you, you turn your backs on us like this." Still, no one moved. No one spoke. Because the Quinn name no longer carried weight. It carried shame. Ivy watched it all unfold, her expression impassive. Then Dominic Quinn, the once mighty patriarch, the man who had abandoned his own daughter to protect his real family, was dragged forward by two officers. His suit, once perfectly tailored, was now wrinkled, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. But as they reached the exit, he twisted violently, wrenching himself free just enough to turn and face Ivy. His dark eyes burned into hers, seething with hatred. "Ivy," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "You think you've won? You think this is over? May S. High HN." Ivy tilted her head, unimpressed. "I don't think so," she said simply. And with that, the officers yanked him back, dragging him toward the waiting police cars outside. Then there was Scarlett. Scarlett, who had always been untouchable. Who had always gotten her way. Who had spent her entire life believing she was above consequences. Now, she was nothing. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her pristine white gown pooling around her like a broken dream. Tears streaked her perfectly painted face as she looked up at Ivy, her expression raw, desperate. "Ivy," she sobbed, "please. Please, I'm begging you." Ivy watched her for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Scarlett's shoulders trembled as she reached out with shaky hands. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Just don't let it end like this." Ivy let out a slow, amused breath. "Please," she echoed, arching a brow. "That's funny. I don't think I ever heard you say that when you stole everything from me." Scarlett flinched as if she had been struck. I didn't mean to." "You did mean to," Ivy interrupted coldly. "You just never thought you'd pay for it." Scarlett let out a strangled sob, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. Ivy didn't stay to watch her break any further. She had seen enough. This was Scarlett's ending. And Ivy had better places to be. She turned, stepping over the discarded wedding ring still lying on the floor. The weight of the past 11 years felt lighter with each step she took. When she reached the grand doors of the ballroom, someone was already waiting for her. Knox Wilder leaned casually against the frame, his hands tucked into the pockets of his navy suit. He looked as effortlessly composed as ever, his dark eyes studying her with quiet amusement. "Well," he said, tilting his head. "That was dramatic." Ivy let out a small laugh, light, unrestrained. The first real laugh she had allowed herself in years. Knox straightened, offering her his arm. "Now that you've burned everything to the ground," he mused, "how about some cake?" Ivy blinked, caught off guard. Then, she smiled. A real, genuine smile. "Cake sounds perfect," she said. And with that, she walked out the doors, leaving the ruins of the Quinn family behind her. For the first time in 11 years, she was finally free. The night air was crisp and cool as Ivy stepped out of the Callahan estate. The distant sounds of sirens faded into the background, swallowed by the vast, open sky above. For the first time in over a decade, she felt weightless. The past had clung to her for so long, years of pain, betrayal, and stolen identity. But now, the chains had been broken. Justice had been served. Scarlett Quinn was ruined. Eleanor and Dominic Quinn were finished. And Ivy had won. She inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill her lungs, then exhaled slowly. It felt different. Lighter. Like she was breathing for the first time. Knox Wilder stood beside her, hands still in his pockets, watching her with quiet amusement. "So," he said, glancing back at the chaos she had left behind. "Was it everything you imagined?" Ivy thought for a moment. She had dreamed of this day, planned for it, fought for it. But now that it was here, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about taking back what was hers. "No," she admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It was better." Knox chuckled. "Damn right it was." They stood there for a moment, side by side, looking out at the city beyond. The future stretched before her, wide open, untouched by the shadows of her past. "What now?" Knox asked, tilting his head. Ivy glanced at him, then up at the sky. "Now," she echoed, exhaling one last time, as if truly letting go. "Now, I live." And with that, she walked forward, toward a life that was finally hers. Justice may be delayed, but it is never forgotten. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about reclaiming what was stolen. And when you've survived the worst, the greatest victory is living freely, unbound by the past.